This is Chapter 3 of Nick Carter's keynote address at UU University 2008. In the last chapter, Nick talked about understanding ourselves. In this chapter, Nick begins speaking about understanding the other.
Now, the second category, and I'm just going to go one deep into this for this afternoon, I think, is ellos, or ellas, them, the other. It's time now, if you get your act together, to begin to turn your orientation to those outside yourself. This is the first step into the Borderlands, and it involves a reorientation from ourselves to the other. The people of the Borderlands tell us that this is an important step. It requires that we not only develop new ways of thinking and talking about things, but a reorientation of what we think about first. To orient ourselves first is to emphasize anthropology over ecclesiology, or theology for that matter. How we see, value, and interpret other human beings is critical to functioning in the Borderlands. Too often, we get caught up in church and theological categories, and categorizing is the wrong place to begin. It's a uniquely Western problem that we always want to categorize people, and that's the first thing we do, is we start running down a list, categorizing those people that we've met and who they are, right? What the mestizo thinkers are teaching us is that's the wrong place to begin. What we need to do is to orient ourselves to emphasize anthropology first. How we see and value and interpret other human beings is critical. Similarly, we need to prioritize orthopraxis over orthodoxy, right action over right thought. We need to worry about how we act and care first before we start thinking about whether it's all right. What we do and how we do it matters more to those who are on the margins of life. It doesn't mean that we forego good thinking, but rather it means that we have to be prepared for the demands of quick decision-making that is often in ambiguous but highly personal situations. We have to come to terms with our often verbalized but regularly undelivered commitment to genuine equality. Oppression is blind to the oppressor, which is part of its demonic character. It humanizes both the oppressor and the oppressed by objectifying the relationship into an owner and a usage mentality, or in Buber's terms, an I-it relationship. And here I think you all have done some great work in your core values on the inherent worth and dignity of every person. This orientation to ellos, to prioritizing personal relationships, means that we must learn how to be a connoisseur of human beings. I love this term. I stole it from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A connoisseur of human beings. Of all the points that I want to share with you, this must be maybe the most important part of creating a new border-crossing mentality. It's a condition of both the mind and the heart. When we are connoisseurs of human beings, we move beyond tolerance to a joy-filled place of appreciation. For Martin Buber, this is the essence of the I-thou relationship, and it is what truly calls us into being. It is the moment that we are finally moved to stop seeing each other as an object. I think we've gotten ourselves wrongly tangled up in tolerance language, and I know folks mean well, but frankly, I think we ought to ditch tolerance as a concept. At the very least, we have to change our perspective and wake up to the fact that tolerance is only a signpost on our road to a far more important destination. Tolerance is not an acceptable goal for the Borderlands. Tolerance is something that people with power exercise in relationship to the powerless. It is a negative judgment wrapped up in avoidance. The truth is that to tolerate something means that I'm not changing what I believe. It's a don't ask, don't tell strategy. However, moving beyond tolerance is transformative. At least it opens up the possibility of transformation. To minister in the Borderlands is the need to meet each stranger with a predisposition to appreciate them. Too often we meet people with this inquisitorial checklist. Often it's a like me list. of traits and habits. And in the process, we end up judging ourselves right out of a relationship. What if a cigarette smoker holds the key to my happiness? What are the chances that I would give them the time of day? What if it were an illegal immigrant who could save our children from harm? What if we ever even have a chance to have a relationship with these people? Or would we have pre-sorted humanity by this checklist? This orientation is one that calls us to discover our common identities as sojourners. It suggests that we are all illegal aliens and that we all live on the margins, so that when we encounter a stranger, we open ourselves with unbridled joy and absolute curiosity, or as some have said, holy curiosity. We've devolved into this insecure position of critic of other human beings, and I think we need to get converted. Frankly, I think we need to get converted. Imagine what it would be like if all the encounters we had began as if we were orienting ourselves to the gift that this person brings us. I think it would be a revolutionary act if we all became connoisseurs of human beings. There is an incredible psychic reaction that takes place when you are on the receiving end of such eager enjoyment of who you are. You know, you've experienced that. It's remarkable. It's what people can do to you when they're really interested in you. It makes you happy. It fills you. The orientation changes you. We can be spreaders of this orientation. What if that became the hallmark of each of our homes? What if that became the hallmark of our churches? It begins with each one of us. All right, a couple more. Hospitality. All right. Now, this is one you know. This is one you've worked on. I want to tell you a story. I had the occasion to spend some time in Africa. This village where we went to was an incredible village. It was called Kikongo. It's up the Congo River. Those of you who have been in Africa know this. It's a remarkably remote villages, mud huts and things. And when we landed in the plane, in this field, all the school children in the little village ran out to greet the plane and sang to me when I got off the plane. They didn't know who I was, but they were singing to me. It was marvelous. Everywhere I went in this village, people were remarkable in how kind and thoughtful they were to me. I went through the village and tried to meet each of the folks in the village, and I met this one fellow who came out, and he was just so humbled to have me in his presence, and he, when I was there, invited me to dinner at his hut, and he showed me around the hut, and it was just simplest mud hut that you could imagine, with a mud floor and a little fire as its own fireplace inside the hut, and he had a little wicker cage outside where he had his 2 chickens there, I was just taken by how neat and clean it was in the middle of this abject poverty. And so I came back several hours later and came into the hut and sat down on the dirt floor for dinner. And you know what we had for dinner? Chicken. 50% of what that man owned, he served me for dinner. There is something important for us to learn from those in the margins, even when we think we're pretty good at hospitality. Once we orient ourselves to the other, we're ready to take our first step into the real borderlands and engage the stranger or the person who is different from us. This is the moment of the first encounter. We've all hosted guests, so the topic is not new to us, but it's a skill, frankly, where a lot of us are pretty weak. Yet anyone who's traveled at all is keenly aware of what amateurs we are. Anyone who's studied Scripture knows that it's one of the most distinctive marks of the people of faith. What others teach us is that radical hospitality begins by creating a space where everyone feels safe and as comfortable as possible. There is careful attention to personal things, and there's a clear sense of acceptance and authentic joy in receiving that other person that the hosts go out of their way to ensure exists. Radical hospitality recognizes that we are first and foremost made in the image of God, Imagio Dei. It believes that there is in each person a potential contribution that is of value that is equal to our own. The valuing is of the utmost, for when persons are not valued, they become socially invisible and their needs and concerns are not acknowledged. That's the root of injustice and of suffering. To be hospitable is to be thoughtful. Hospitality can find its way into many different forms. Recently, I became aware of an Iranian man who moved to a mid-sized town in the middle of Pennsylvania. He took the bus to work every day and was really quite punctual about his routine. He arrived at the bus stop 15 minutes, sat quietly with his briefcase, dressed neatly in his tie, and waited for the bus to come. He got on the bus and always sat on the sidewalk side so that he could see people, went to work, and came home. Some months after he had lived in that town, a woman who took the bus the same day and had seen him in all those months doing this routine turned to him and said, "Hello," and introduced herself. As she did, he thanked her effusively, and he began to cry and sobbed uncontrollably. She was worried that she'd done something wrong, and she asked the man what had happened. And he said this: "People here talk to animals. They greet animals. But they don't talk to strangers, to other human beings." An extreme example, perhaps, but it carries a point. To be thoughtful is to be considerate. To be thoughtful is to be aware. To be thoughtful is also to be knowledgeable. It means that I've taken the time to learn about you and think about you, about your needs and concerns. I don't try and run around and be hospitable the moment you show up the door. I think about you before you come. I do everything I can to imagine what it would be like to be in your situation, to be as awkward as you might feel. And what could I do to make you feel less awkward, to make you feel more comfortable? I take time to clarify my language because what I say may not be what you hear. Lastly, to be hospitable is to be heartful. It requires of us an openness of our hearts and a willingness to make our lives visible and available to another. Hospitality calls us to enlarge our hearts by offering our time and our personal resources. How many of us clumsily demonstrate our ignorance of others in what we say or what we do? When we have been hospitable, we have opened the door to the stranger and we make them feel welcome. This, I think, is something we could all get very good at without spending a whole lot of money. Just being thoughtful. The last one I'll do, and then I really will quit, is this one. And I have to tell you, this is an important one. You know, everybody has a story to tell. To be human is to tell a story. It is perhaps one of the most distinctive traits of what it is to be human, is to have a story to tell. Each of us has a story. It's a fascinating story, but sometimes we're not very good at letting others. We're all avid storytellers, but we're not avid story listeners. I'm really good about broadcasting my humanity, just don't mess me up with your humanity, right? I was a man on a mission. I was part of a delegation that went to El Salvador in the 1980s to inspect refugee and resettlement camps It was an international group. We had a translator, and we went to several villages. We had 8 villages that we went to in the battle zone, but we were very conscious of the fact that they had told us that we had a limited amount of time to go to these villages and sort of see what was going on. We couldn't take pictures, but we could interview people and that. And so we were moving at a rather rapid pace. As we were walking, I found myself anxious about the next village, and one of the people from the village came up and said, "There's a woman who wants to give you her testimony." Well, as Baptist, you know, I do testimonies. That's okay. I know I'm there, but I said, you know, is this really necessary? I'm really in a hurry to get to these other villages. I said, no, this woman really wants to talk to you. I said, okay, and I sort of checked with the group to make sure that it was okay and that they would wait for me. So I sat down on a stump outside this woman's hut, and she came out. Her name was Maria, and she had on 3 dresses. As I found out later, it was everything she owned, and she wanted to put them all on to talk to me. And as she began, and the translator was telling the stories as she went, I got a little puzzled. And, and so I said, perhaps we should start with prayer. And the word came back from the translator that the woman didn't want to pray. Now I'm really confused. And she said, you don't understand. She said she doesn't have time for prayer. And I said, why? She said, well, she doesn't want to give you her religious testimony. She wants to give you her testimony about her torture. And so she came and she talked to me about the fact that the government troops had decided that her son was collaborating with the rebels and that they wanted her to tell them where her son was. She refused to tell them, and so they took her away. And they took her to a torture chamber in the city where she spent 4 days stretched out, straddled, naked, with 4 men who abused her in the grossest ways that I have ever heard in my life. By the time she finished, I was weeping uncontrollably. And she would come and wipe the tears from me and say, no. I didn't tell you this because I wanted to make you sad. I need you to understand what has happened to me, and I need you to go and tell the story. I need you to tell my story. I got a whole new lesson about listening from this woman and what it means to be radically invested in empathizing. Learning how to be avid, appreciative, and attentive vessels into which others can pour out their story is not only affirmative of their humanity, it opens us up to being transformed. Border crossers are those who have been transformed in the way that they listen. Their goal is to find a place to listen that is common to us all, from our shared humanity. When we do it, it enables us to get beyond our impulses to protect ourselves from what we're hearing, to reject it or to judge it. To be truly attentive is to suspend judgment and to make time for the potential gift that this person may be bringing us. People who are effective in dealing with strangers and people who are different have nurtured a remarkable capacity for empathy. They pick up what the other person is feeling. They understand that they might be feeling awkward or unsure or hurt. They get them a chair. They see that they're tired and they need to sit down. They get them a glass of water. They do just those small things, this empathy. And we can do that. We can do that. We can watch another person with affection, with empathy, and say, how can I make them feel more comfortable? How can I understand their awkwardness, their potential hurt? You know, people are often afraid to appreciate someone whose behavior they disapprove of for the fear that the appreciation will keep the oppressive behavior unchallenged. However, only seeing what is human in the other person who acts oppressively, only by doing that can we hope to really bring about any change. All of us are more receptive to change when we know we're liked. It's the relationship that transforms us, not the argument, not the judgment. Right? The challenge is for each of us to learn to speak the truth in love. Love is often the forgotten in our cultural patterns of confronting each other and those that we don't like. I'm going to end there for this session. I want to say that this has been a lot, and you've been incredibly patient. But I hope that you're beginning to see a rhythm in this approach, that there is an urgency to what we're about, that we need people who have mastered these skills, and that if we begin to do so, we really can begin to have an impact, even if it is just on each other. Even if it is just on each other. And we need to practice these things. We need to get good at it. We can understand it intellectually, but if we don't begin to practice it, it'll never mature into something really impactful. And so that'll be some of the exercises that we're going to do. We're going to sort of try that on and see what we can do. And then we're going to talk in the next session a little bit about beginning to shift in a larger, more corporate way about what we do. I hope that's been helpful. It's been great as a first time. Thank you.
This concludes Chapter 3 of Nick's keynote presentation. You'll have 3 discussion questions. The first is, practice holy curiosity by listening, without dialogue, questions, or comment, to another's border-crossing experiences. Listen without comment for 10 minutes, then switch places. What was it like to be so thoughtfully and thoroughly heard? Press play to move on to the next question.